Hey, y'all. So we've had incredible conversations here on the Tell Me More podcast. And as you well know, the entire intention here is not to change your mind. I'm not here trying to make you think like me. This is the only podcast where I just want to empower you to think better for yourself. And that means bringing conversations around topics that may be controversial or maybe current event hot or maybe a little spicy, and getting you those conversations straight from people who actually know what's going on. People who have been in the experience, have the lived experience with a partner or a spouse, or people who are intimately involved in the policy work, the political aspect of it, or people who are on the ground experiencing it every single day. No weird media here, no strange filters, no perspectives or odd opinions, just straight from the real people's mouths. And I hear that you guys are loving it, and I'm loving it too. And we all know that right now, one of the hottest topics everywhere is everything that has to do with autism and children that are experiencing the world in a non-neurotypical way. So what does that mean? I kind of know. What is the cause? I kind of know, right? But either way, I know that I don't want to just absorb my opinions and my thoughts about this from the media or from political administrations or from, the next coolest influencer. I want to hear and learn about it from someone who is on the ground with these kids. And that's why I tapped my dear friend, Alicia Trice, who is a school psychologist and an educational therapist who's worked with children in every way, shape, and form. Children who are present on the spectrum, children with other non-neurotypical diagnoses, and also children who are just going through a tough time and need an extra hand. And that's what's amazing about our educators. They're the ones on the ground. So let's listen to them because I'm sure they have something to say. Alicia, thank you for being here.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Listen, first off, shout out to our educators. Okay.
Yeah.
In the classroom, on the ground, working with the kids. I just want to say I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's definitely been a tough few years.
Yes,
but
yes,
good,
yes.
Good work.
Yes, and it's important work. And you guys spend more time with our kids, I think, than any of us. So I'm really grateful. When I get them back for the summer, I'm like, woo!
What do I do now?
What do I do with these babies? Is this how y'all act in the classroom? So I appreciate you. Now, I always like to start off with just, a simple question. If there was one truth, right, one reality about children who are experiencing the world on the spectrum or in a non-neurotypical fashion, something that, people may not know or people may think, but think incorrectly. If there's one truth you could blast into their brains, what would it be?
I would say that you are not defined by your diagnosis, by your past, by your circumstances, or any other title or category that you want to throw out there. It doesn't define who you are or who these kids are.
Ooh, that is big. And honestly, I feel like the little kid in me healed a little bit there. Like I am not what I've been through.
Not at all.
So tell me more about that. Tell me more about what that means to you and how you're seeing it in the world.
Yeah. So I've worked with hundreds of kids and families, and the first thing that we always find out about a kid is their diagnosis. And that's supposed to kind of cover it all, and we should know everything about them. But I've learned over the last 10 plus years that just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean you fit in the same box as somebody else. So
Ooh.
it can be really frustrating when somebody says, oh, they have autism, they can't do that. Or they have this, they can't do that. So I'm really passionate about is meeting people where they are, diagnosis or not. We need to be looking at them as a person, looking at the skills and strengths that they have outside of who they might be, and working from there.
So that's huge. Like that is actually a really big statement because I know that as an individual, I'm complex. So if someone says, well, you're a Black female, so you must, or you are a child of African immigrants, so you must, or if I go somewhere else, you're an American, so you must, that's really limiting and it doesn't feel good. And you're saying you experience this with diagnoses as well. Can you actually tell us a little bit more, for those of us who are blessed to not have to, have a lot of familiarity with the extra work, right, and complications that go along with, various diagnoses in our life. Can you tell us a little bit about what does it even mean to be autistic? What is it when you're on the spectrum? Because TikTok has us thinking every time we don't like anybody, we might be on the spectrum, right?
Everybody now.
Everybody, right? Everybody. So is
Yeah.
that the case? Is it that there is more autism? Is there like what is it, and what am I looking at?
Yeah. I mean, I've had this conversation a lot over the past couple years, I think, as TikTok diagnosis has become more popular.
It's tough for the docs out there.
Yeah,
They're struggling.
well, the reality is that there's a lot more resources available. There's a lot more awareness. I mean, that's what social media is great for. TikTok and
Mhm.
Instagram is spreading awareness about things that people don't know about, so they can access more information or whatever to get the support that they need. But that's also causing people to say, well, I don't really like being around people, so I must have autism,
Right.
which
That
isn't the
may not be
reality.
the case.
It could be,
But it may not be.
it may
Right.
not be.
So what is autism then? Like, does it even have a singular diagnosis, or is that
Yeah.
what spectrum means?
I mean, so there is a spectrum and it can show up in a different way depending on the individual, but it's a neurological disorder, a genetic disorder. There's still a lot of research being done on autism to figure out the exact cause or what's going on, but it is a neurological disorder.
So neurological meaning it's in the brain, right?
Mhm.
You know, so someone who has autism doesn't necessarily present with like a rash on their foot.
No.
It's not that, right? I think it's important for the context, right?
Yeah.
Because again, since TikTok has all sorts of like, keyboard psychologists, like we just
Mhm.
want to make sure that, as influencers maybe telling us certain things like, oh, I noticed that my kid only liked to play with a certain toy and I didn't realize that was an early sign of autism. It
Yeah.
may or may not be,
Mhm.
but we do know it's a neurological disorder. So it presents in the brain, and that is something that thus you would need to speak to a psychologist to talk to, or is that just a regular doctor visit?
You can do both. So the first step is typically talking to like your general doctor, just
Mhm.
your primary care physician, and they will give you a referral to a clinical psychologist to do
Explore it
to do some
further.
testing and see if there's more going on that they can't see.
Now, I know you mentioned genetic as well, and
Mhm.
I know that this is still kind of actually, I don't even know if it's actually that up in the air because there have been some recent studies that have come
Mhm.
out, based on my understanding of it, that say that, it's pretty confirmed that there's some genetic component here.
Mhm.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, no. So it is confirmed that there's a genetic component, but still figuring out where it comes
That
from,
makes
what
sense.
genetics is, involved in, but there's definitely a genetic component.
Okay, so that actually is really helpful because I think a lot of us, in a world where it can be really tough to hear a diagnosis. Like,
Mhm.
I'm gonna speak from, difficult personal experience, but, I had a daughter who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and one of the first things I wanted to know was, is it because, her mother smoked around her? Is it because
Mhm.
she grew up in a part of Baltimore where, you know, sanitation wasn't, what was the reason? Like,
Yeah.
everyone wants a reason so bad because it can be tough to, grapple with the diagnosis.
Mhm.
And if we're hearing that there's a genetic component, we right now, I guess what you're saying is we don't know if it's like, oh, it comes from the mother's bloodline, or oh, it's because people who are brunettes may have more kids. We don't know that part.
Exactly.
Got it. But we do know that it is connected to your parents in some genetic way.
Yes.
Oh, wow. So if you had a uncle who maybe had severe signs of autism, like kind of clear, and even if you and your husband may not have, if your child presents that way, it could be that it passed through your bloodline.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow. So, okay, so that's huge, and I'm gonna just ask this question kinda transparently, right?
Mhm.
I have heard that autism can be caused by the food that you eat, that it can be caused, or that these are contributing factors, or that it can be caused by vaccines, that it can be which I've been vaccinated, my whole family, my whole bloodline's been vaccinated, and we have no incidents of autism.
Mhm.
So, I'm not a scientist, I didn't spend my life studying this, but is autism caused by or contributed to by environment at all?
No. No,
Like, categorically, we can say, like,
yeah,
no. Okay.
no. And I think what you spoke to about when you hear a diagnosis, you want to figure out why. You look at everything that's happened up until that point to figure out what caused this because it can be really scary, and to
Yeah.
navigate how to move forward, you want to find out how you can help. But the reality is that that's not the cause.
Mhm.
I empathize with people that are looking for those answers because, like I said, it is scary. But I mean, no,
It's not, it's genetic.
no, it's
Yeah,
genetic, and autism is not caused by vaccines or any other environmental
things. Now,
factor.
to be fair, right?
Mhm.
Because I always want to make sure that we're giving like, balanced perspectives.
Yeah.
If and this is why I'm asking you in case I'm wrong or, an understanding of it. Even if autism isn't caused by environmental considerations, if someone does have autism genetically, certain environments could probably increase the appearance, or I guess like I don't want to say the activation. I don't know. I don't want to offend by using the incorrect terms,
Mhm.
but if someone is autistic, if they are in certain environments that maybe are loud or, with materials or textures they don't like or whatever,
Yeah.
could it seem like your child's autism is getting worse?
Oh, for sure. I mean, and I think that is anybody
Right. No,
outside of
listen, that's facts.
autism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you're in an environment that is uncomfortable for you, it's going to cause a reaction, whether it's in
Mm,
your body or outwardly. But yeah, if I mean, it is very typical for those with autism to have more sensitivity to, like you said, sounds, textures, just different environmental things. So those spaces can be difficult to be in without some accommodation.
sure.
So it might cause just like any other
Heightened behavior.
heightened behavior. So you might be in an environment that's uncomfortable and you might want to run away or you might want
Mhm.
to like scream. Sometimes you just are feeling so overwhelmed and you can't figure out why or how to help it, and that can show up in different ways.
That makes a lot of sense. We had Dr. Jessica Nurick here last, who is a nutritional scientist, and she's expert in public health, and she
Mhm.
was talking about how correlation doesn't mean causation,
Yeah.
right? So even if you notice that every time your kid eats a banana, your kid who is diagnosed on the spectrum, and that banana just enrages them,
Hmm.
it doesn't necessarily mean that the banana caused the autism. It may be
Exactly.
that it's correlated that bananas activate behaviors associated with autism.
Hmm.
Is that I'm trying to make sure I understand it right.
Yeah, no, for
Okay.
sure. And I think that's where we get into like muddy waters is like, well, they ate a banana and then this happened. This must be why.
Mm.
But it could be so many other things. One of my favorite like analogies about this is every time I go to the beach, I eat ice cream and I come home with a sunburn. Does that mean ice cream causes my sunburn?
Oh, sure. That's
No,
good.
it's because it's sunny at the beach. So
Mhm.
just because something happens at the same time, there are a lot of other things that could be going on, things that you might not even see internally
Right.
that are causing different behaviors to happen.
No, that's super. So let's kind of dive more into these behaviors because I do think that, and I'm just going to say this transparently, like while also as a Christian, like I'm like, oh, my baby is healthy, Lord, my baby's good.
Mhm.
I also recognize I had a high risk pregnancy. I had a baby at 40. Even though we don't have a genetic, component into autism, we do know that there can be other complexities that because it's unidentified right now.
Mhm.
So if a parent out there is saying to themselves, we're worried, what are some of the things that, present, as autism, and when does it show up, and what
Mhm.
does it look like? I mean, you've done this your whole professional life. So,
Yeah.
you've seen early stage, and then you've
Yes.
also seen kind of later on. Can you walk
Mhm.
us through what that's like?
Yeah, typically diagnosis will happen anywhere from, well, it can happen at any time,
Mhm.
but it can happen as early as I've seen as early as like 1,
Oh,
which is
wow.
very early.
Yeah.
And I don't always recommend because
Mhm.
so much can change between 1 and 5, 1 and 6.
Listen, a lot has changed from
Um,
38 to 40, okay?
yeah.
Sis was divorced, she now has a whole baby, okay?
Exactly.
A
Things
lot
can change.
changes. Things change.
Yeah, but so you can diagnose really early, especially if they're on like the higher end of the spectrum. But the things that I most typically see what parents are worried about is lack of like social interaction
Mhm.
or not making a lot of eye contact, not really communicating. So what that can look like when you're that young and not verbally talking is somebody calls your name and you don't acknowledge it,
Mm.
or
I do that anyways, girl. I just be like,
yeah,
"Mom's
we
not
have to
here.
figure
Mom is
out,
closed."
is this on purpose or
Right, right,
we
right,
have to figure that part out too.
right.
But it can look like just not really interacting with others
Mhm.
around you, not interacting with your environment. Another common thing that we look for is like stereotypical behavior, which is kind of
Like
like,
developmental milestones like that
yeah,
or
so not specifically. That can be impacted
okay.
sometimes, but not all the time. Sometimes
Wow.
developmental milestones, physical
Will happen
milestones,
anyways, like
yep,
crawling, walking,
yep,
sitting, all that.
that's not
Okay.
always impacted. But we're looking at like children who they might get really excited and flap their hands really fast when they're
Mhm.
excited or upset. You might see eye movements that like are going to the side. There's just some physical characteristics that parents can watch for too.
Okay, but those also don't necessarily mean
No.
autism, right?
No.
Got it. Because I was a talker. I
Yes.
mean, who knows? You know what I mean? Like, you
Yeah.
just never know with your kids. But that's also why I guess it helps to find a professional to kind of
Mhm.
aid you in that journey.
Yeah, and there are a lot of early intervention resources, so even if you just have a little bit of a concern or you see something and you're like, "This doesn't seem normal or
Mhm.
typical," reach out to your doctor or reach out to someone who can point you in the right direction or give you some feedback and steps to move forward.
That's really helpful. Now, I know with your work in particular, you've worked in classrooms,
Mhm,
with children who've needed additional support. You've also gone to homes, to help,
mhm.
some of these super special kiddos get, all the attention they need. And you've worked with the parents.
Yes.
So, what are the behaviors that you run into with parents that you think are the most difficult
Mm.
when dealing with, children who have, tough diagnoses?
I think the biggest thing with parents, and this is tough because you're the parent,
Mhm.
you want to fix everything. You want to make sure that they're comfortable and safe and all the things. So I like to tell parents the first thing, any behavior from anyone, diagnosis or not, is a form of communication. So
Mm.
the biggest thing that we need to look for when we're trying to help decrease behaviors that are hard to deal with is, what are they trying to communicate?
Mm.
So if we're looking at a child who is screaming and like throwing their body all over the place because the parents like, I don't know why it's happening randomly. So
Mhm.
there's always a reason. So we
Yeah.
have to figure that out. And most of the time it's hard because we're not, like, at that age, we're not having verbal communication. We
Mhm.
can't always figure it out. But the biggest thing is figuring that out and then working to provide that need in another way.
So, I know that I would have a tough time having someone come into my house and tell me, just this my
Mhm.
personality, no
Yeah.
matter how much
Me
I
too.
desire yeah, no matter how much I desire for the best for my kid, it would be really tough when I am in the weeds all day and all night to have
Mhm.
a specialist come in and say, "Hey girl, this is the method." What does that look like?
Mhm.
Like, just to kind of paint the portrait for the parent who may be hesitant,
Yeah.
to kind of engage in this help or even get that analysis or get that support. What does it look like? Do you just, like, show up? Do you bring, like, a bucket of tools? Are there snacks? Like, what does it look like,
Yeah,
And I know that you've had some favorite clients you've worked with. Can you just, like, walk us through what it looks like?
for sure. The biggest thing I'll say first, I'm not coming in to change anything or tell you what to do or tell you you're doing it wrong, because that's never the case. I always champion parents, and I'm amazed when I walk into houses because they're doing such a good job. And that's the first
Mm.
thing I say is, "You're doing such a good job." And me being here is, like, evidence of that. So,
Mhm.
that's the first thing I say, like, there's no judgment here.
Yeah, no wrong answers. We're just here
No.
to figure out more.
Usually, it starts with, before I even come in, is some kind of intake call or, like, maybe a meeting with just the parent so I can get information about, tell me everything that's going on so I have a picture of how to help. And that way I'm a little bit more prepared when I work with the kiddo or with the family. But typically, like I said, it starts with just getting to know the family and the kid, making sure they feel safe and comfortable with me, because you can't do anything if you don't
Mm.
feel safe,
Mhm.
emotionally and physically. So
Mhm.
that's the first thing I do, is just making sure we build, like, a good relationship and a good rapport. And then it really depends on that. It's very individualized depending on what they need. If it's academic or behavioral or social, we walk through different strategies that might help them. I always talk to the parents about, like, here's some things that I've seen work, here's some things you
Mhm.
could try. And I've had parents straight up tell me, I'm not doing that. That will never work in our
Oh,
home, which
wow.
I'm like, okay, that's totally fine.
You're here all the time, so
Yeah, I
yeah.
don't know. So
Mhm.
let's talk about what else could work. So it's
Mhm.
very much a team effort. I'm there as a professional, but not to tell you what to do.
Right.
So it's like a team effort, and we're going to figure this out together. My goal is always to help the parent feel confident to make change when I'm not there too.
No, that's so powerful. I think that what's great is hearing that, yes, there are solutions and yes, it can be well managed. And I think
Mhm.
the word team probably gives a lot of parents peace who are
Mhm.
either, concerned that they may have to walk down this path or are already in this path.
Yeah.
Team is what you should be looking for. But I want to kind of get to, one of the harder components of this. One of the things that I think makes people very vocal advocates
Mhm.
around both autism awareness, but also, concern around how autism is navigated in our country is that they feel like they're running up against a wall.
Mhm.
And as someone who's kind of on the front lines of this work, a lot of parents get really frustrated. They feel like, they can't get a diagnosis sister. I have a really, really good friend who I have to say is probably one of the best mothers I know.
Mhm.
This woman would lay down her life, not just for her, but for any child. That's just who she
Yeah.
is. And, her daughter was attending a conventional school, and she was informed that, this school would be great for her daughter. She went in kind of saying, these are some challenges we're facing, and then was told, hey, we're going to have your daughter can't be here,
Yeah.
as things had changed, and I can see from your face, for those of you guys who aren't watching on YouTube, that you've maybe run into this before or seen this
Yeah.
before, I can't imagine as a mom how absolutely frustrating it is knowing that routine matters. Like, we're talking with a neurotypical child
Yes.
being told, hey, come pick up your kid. This ain't working.
Mm.
So what's going on? You know what I mean? Are people just not informed? What are parents supposed to do? Like, what's going on?
Yeah. I mean, it's very multi-layered and
Yeah,
complex.
give me
but
the layers, girl. Give me the cake. What's going
yeah,
on?
I mean, the reality is that schools are not set up to support all students. I worked in schools for several years, and that's part of the reason I wanted to leave was I felt boxed in and like I couldn't do the job that I love to do well. There's just a lot of regulations and rules that have to be met in order to even provide help and services. And this isn't a knock to educators. They're doing the best they
Everything
can
they can do
within the rules that they have.
Right.
But the reality is that there is just not enough resources. There's lack of funding. That's why schools are having such a hard time and are frustrated too. And then it gets put back on the parents.
Right.
So I feel that frustration. And unfortunately, that's like the reality of our country right now is just there's not a lot of resources and support given to programs that need them. So I find that a lot of parents, unfortunately, are moving to like more privatized solutions or looking for support in other ways outside of the school if they can afford it, which is a whole nother conversation.
That is a whole other conversation. I mean, we'll touch on it a little bit here,
Yeah.
and I'd love to get transparent about the numbers if you're okay with it. Because again, you've done this in different ways, shapes, and forms. I think for a lot of us, the cost of care is a huge issue in America. So if someone is able to, get that support in their kid's school, what does that look like? Is it at no cost? Is it, do I have to pay, my local public school? Like, what does that look like as a front line for their first step?
So
support?
in a public school setting, it's cost free. They go through an evaluation, determine if they do have a need for support and eligibility, and the school is required to provide what every child needs. The problem is that schools don't always have the best
people and
resources to provide that. So they provide it, but it's not always done to the best of like the best it should be.
Right. Or as focused on your child per se.
Yeah.
Right. So then what would be the next step up, right? Like if you are saying, okay, look, I'm going to use a little bit of my school's resources, but I'd like to, is there like group therapy or is there like a private coaching? Like what does that look like next?
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends on each family, but if you have an insurance that covers a lot of things, you can usually get an evaluation at least partially covered to get a diagnosis. Schools don't diagnose, so that's an important distinction. But
that's good to know.
If you do have a provider, you do an evaluation outside of the school and receive a medical diagnosis.
Can schools make referrals? Like if your school's been noticing, because teachers are with your kids more than anywhere else. So if they notice something's happening or that there may be additional support required, can they aid in sending you to a place to get help?
So they can't directly like make a referral. It usually has to come from your doctor, but a doctor will usually use information from the school.
Perfect.
They'll ask for information to send to whoever they need to.
That is really helpful. And so, we've heard a lot about recent changes that are going to be happening to Medicaid and Medicare and some of the government funded healthcare systems. In your experience, if you can speak to this at all, a lot of these programs, particularly in school where you're getting the referrals to keep the cost low or to make it free. And Medicare, Medicaid, for those of you who may not know, also go by other terms. Like in California, it's Medi-Cal. In I think Illinois, it's Sooner Care. That might be Arkansas. I don't know. Please stay out of my DMs. There's, but there are all these different names locally and regionally. So definitely check and see if what the name is for you if you are on a Medicare or Medicaid government sponsored healthcare program. But these programs, I believe, also help pay to make sure that even if you have something it's not just for like if you have a cut or a broken bone. It also helps with some of these things.
Yep, absolutely. It can be just as helpful as like a traditional insurance. So it can cover partial evaluations. It can cover therapies and services.
Wow.
So I think The hard thing is you do have to have a diagnosis typically to receive any sort of covered services.
Right.
So if you have that, it can open a lot of doors for a lot of families, which is great. If not, it can be very, very expensive.
And it can also be tough just to get the diagnosis.
Yes.
But if you're able to, knowing that some of the financial difficulty of it, challenges can be offset by a program like Medicaid is tremendous. And
Yes.
unfortunately, I think a lot of us heard that there are going to be some major cuts happening to Medicaid. And it does make me sad because I think one of the things that'll happen then is, some of those cares may be limited for kids who are dealing with a diagnosis of autism.
Yes, absolutely. That for a long time, that was the majority of the kids that I worked with. So.
Oh, wow. So the majority of kids that you've worked with in your professional career, their care was being covered for by programs.
Yes.
So when Medicaid was cut, they were actually cutting care for children. Oh, gosh, that's really tough, especially because I think something that we all agree on is that autism is something that's important, that these kids, without question, benefit from additional support.
Oh, for sure.
Right. And that any programs that cut care for children, that's really harmful and unfortunate.
Yeah, it's really tough on the families.
That's really tough on the families. That just definitely makes me really sad. Okay, so then let's dive a little bit more then into, there's been a lot of talk recently about autism in general. I can honestly say, and I think this sentence has said a lot, I don't remember hearing a lot about this when I was growing up. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't hear, although we all kind of knew someone in our family who maybe had different social interactions or maybe kind of, I always call it timing out, where it's like, I'm good to this point and then I need out of this space, and not just in the introverted way, but in the we've reached our cap, or we've had older family members or cousins who we just knew interacted differently. I do remember growing up with that, but when it comes to the clear-cut diagnosis of autism, that feels new to me, especially with the elevated conversation on social media where people are like, don't use, plastic cookware or don't use, a black spatula or just like I'm hearing everything is connected to autism. And I'm really grateful that I'm tapped into, a lot of scientific resources to find out that it's genetic, and that it's, while I probably shouldn't eat melted plastic in my food anyways,
Maybe not.
just for taste alone, you know what I mean? But, it's helpful to know that, okay, I don't need to change my whole life because, a diagnosis is a diagnosis. But I want to know, did you as a professional on the front line notice a difference? Is there actually more autism now?
So the numbers don't lie. There are more people being diagnosed with autism. That's true. But there is a lot more resources. There's a lot more knowledge. It's a lot more accessible to get information, to be evaluated sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
But there's just more information and people know more and they're getting more support and help and it's more accepted too. I think sometimes this was like a point of shame for some families. So we don't really talk about it. We don't want to even know.
Or we just don't know what's going on.
Exactly.
And we've just accepted it. So it's funny because I try to think of this based on what you're explaining, kind of like divorce. For tons of years, there were like no divorces. The divorce rate in America was like nothing, right? But there were a lot of unhappy marriages, girl. You know what I mean? A lot of unhappy marriages. And as soon as women got the right to file for divorce themselves and they didn't have to wait for their husband to like give them permission, suddenly we saw the divorce rate go up. Magic, right? So what you're telling me is that it's not that there is necessarily more autism. It just may be that there are more diagnoses. And that could even be social media. So where I may have thought before, oh, my kiddo just has like a great example is adult ADHD. I'm seeing more and more people get diagnosed as adults. And it doesn't mean that they just caught ADHD at age 35.
Just realized
it. Right. They realized what's happening and what's going on. And some of that is the goodness of social media.
Definitely.
That is awesome. But also we have to keep in mind that social media has other things. So I want to ask you a question. I love asking this question of like the professionals, the doctors, people on the, that are hands-on with the kiddos. When you see social media, right, as someone who is an expert, right, you've got this special filter. So you'll hear a conversation of someone saying like, don't feed your kids beans. Beans cause autism. What do you think when you see that sort of thing?
I mean, I think there's some layer of like, you just like laugh it off. But then there is some layer of like, this is terrifying.
Right. Well, because people in the comments and be like, oh my gosh, yes. Like, this is why I don't feed my kid beans. Like, well, how does that feel?
Yeah. I mean, it's scary and it's disheartening a little bit because social media, as we all know, the algorithm feeds
Mhm.
you what you're watching. So you'll
Right.
get more and more of this type of video. And for the parents who are desperate to find answers, to find resources, to figure out how they can help their child, they're getting a lot of this misinformation and clinging to it for hope when
Yeah.
it's really not the thing that's going to move the needle or help them in the long run. I mean, not all of it's harmful. Some of it is.
Yeah.
Some of it's just not going to work.
Right, right, right. Or it's
um,
connected to maybe a monetary gain that
right.
actually doesn't benefit, you know?
Exactly.
And that's so unfortunate too, I think, because as a mom of 4, when I tell you, when I see the way, like I was referencing one of my good friends who has this just beautiful, incredible, magical daughter,
Hmm.
and the way she loves her baby down, girl, you know what I mean? Like, as a
Yeah.
mama, I am so deeply in admiration, and I get other moms, so when they are consuming everything and looking for that answer and seeking the needle in the haystack, like, I get that ferocity, right? Because
Hmm.
that's the desire that you want your child to have everything.
Hmm.
But as
Absolutely.
a professional, when you're
Hmm.
looking at it, you're like barking up the wrong tree, or, sharing information that doesn't actually help, that could actually distract from
Hmm.
what could.
Yeah, it's tough. And there's not a lot that we can do to change it except
Mhm.
hopefully spread more correct information, make resources more available, and just get more of the right information out there.
And would you say, what responsibility do you think that, there are a lot of influencers who sell supplements, who partner to collaborate around, all sorts of things, because there is a monetary benefit,
Hmm.
slash there's also a popularity benefit, like certain things do get headlines and they do
Yeah.
get clicks. What responsibility do you think that, people like me who have podcasts, or people who are influencers, or have platforms that we have
Hmm.
outside of sharing? Because it used to be more about, this is just my experience. And I think it's
Yeah.
turning more into, this is what you should be doing.
Hmm.
And I asked this of all my guests, like, what responsibility do you think we have?
Honestly, if you have a platform and an audience, I think you have a responsibility to make sure that what you're promoting is right, real, that it works to your knowledge,
Mhm,
to do a little bit more research about it. If you aren't personally impacted by whatever it is, to find somebody who is and talk to them about it. Just get more
mhm.
information before promoting or spreading
Amplifying.
information that you don't know much about.
Yeah, no, that's really good, and that's something I always like to keep and take to heart, and
Yeah,
that's
you
huge.
do a
So,
great job.
thank you. I try my best, girl. I try my best, and I have no fear about issuing retractions either. I'll be like, "Y'all, we need to sit down." So remember how I said I was married? Ha, plot twist.
Not anymore.
Retract, retract. The cast has changed on the show, okay? We'll be recasting the father figure. So I'm telling you right now, like, I have no problem kinda calling it out, but
Hmm.
it's helpful for me to be able to hear from, experts like you, like, please, like, hold yourself accountable, girl.
Hmm.
So, the conversation has changed, and I kinda wanna call out something that I think is a inflection point, that happened recently.
Hmm.
I talk a lot about how this current administration, and it's always important to me not to, shame or demonize, or, make people feel a certain way about their choice
Hmm.
if they voted for this current administration. But I do also want to speak to the 90 million people that did not vote at all, who may be saying to themselves, I'm just kind of watching what's happening and figuring out where I stand. Right.
Hmm.
So, one of the things that happened in this current administration, I imagine amongst those 90 million, they probably represent some people who are not neurotypical.
Yeah.
They mentioned that, people who are diagnosed with autism, whether they're children or adults, would not be able to do a few things. And I wanted to ask you, as a professional, as I go down a list of these things,
Hmm.
because that statement was made by Robert Kennedy Jr., who, self-admittedly, I'm only repeating what he has said with no, pretense around it,
Hmm.
that he is not a doctor, and he said you should not be listening to him for medical advice, that makes him uncomfortable.
Hmm.
But he is the director of, health services for
Yes.
our country. So I want to ask you, as a professional, who is within standing to be able to provide support around diagnoses.
Mm.
Someone who has been diagnosed as autistic, will they never hold a job in their lives?
That is not true.
Okay.
I work with a lot of people that have autism that have held jobs. I worked in a program where there was job shadowing where we were working side by side, helping them understand how to interview. How do you show up for work? How do you do this? How do you make it through your workday until they were independent? So
And they were
they're
able to do that independently.
yes,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay. And then, another statement that was made by him was that people who, And again, all of this information is readily verifiable on the internet.
Mhm.
People who are diagnosed with autism are not able to use the restroom independently. They are not able to use a toilet and likely would not be able to do so for the remainder of their lives. Is that a true statement?
Not a true statement. Of course, there are situations where that's the case, but
Mhm.
a lot of the families that I work with, again, we are moving towards independence
Mhm.
at all times.
So is that an overwhelmingly the case that that is associated with that diagnosis, or is
No,
that an outlier?
that's an outlier.
Oh, it is an outlier. Okay. People with autism are you work with both the parents and the kids, are a burden to their families, and that their families often are seeking to have that burden removed because it is just so overwhelming in their lives and they would prefer not to have their children.
Not at all.
Oh, okay. Tell us more.
I would, out of all the families I've worked with, I have never met one family say they wish they didn't have this child, that they're a burden, that they wish things were nothing. They
Mhm,
love their children as much as any other family, any other
mhm.
parent that I've met, and their only desire is to support them and make their life better.
Yeah,
So they
yeah.
support them in any ways that they can.
I relate as a mom. My kids
Yeah.
are not easy, right?
No, never.
They're the light of my life, but you have tough moments, but burden
Mhm.
is not a word that I would ever associate with my babies,
No.
ever. Then one of the means that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was describing as a potential treatment plan, for not just those who are non-neurotypical, but also for those who may be facing addiction, which is a bit of an issue in our country
Mhm.
as well, that I am personally affected by. I have a daughter who's, battles with addiction. So that being who is currently sober. Shout out. I'm so proud of you, baby
Yay.
girl. I was like, shout out. But, one of the things he recommended is that possibly creating and I just want to hear your take on this as someone who actually does treatment plans and has seen results, what's effective,
Mhm.
whether or not you think this might be a viable option, is that he really believes that a work camp situation might work, where both mixing them, so people who are non-neurotypical and have a diagnosis of anything from ADHD to autism to a diagnosis of addiction, and putting them on a facility, possibly in the Midwest, where they're able to, play with horses and, work the fields and get into a physical, environment as well as have regimented meals, that would suffice to, especially removing them from their homes, things like that, putting them in this environment would suffice to get far more advancements around their diagnosis and possibly even cure them of
Mm,
their autism.
interesting.
Yeah. Do you believe that that would work, or have you
No.
tried anything like that,
No,
or
I promised you that that would not work.
okay. Are you sure? I mean, have you tried it?
I haven't tried it, so I
You
guess
haven't
I
tried
can't
it.
promise,
Right.
but I don't believe that that would work well.
Mhm. Are there some reasons why?
For one, the biggest indicator of progress and growth is feeling safe and having a secure relationship with
Mm,
your family, with your provider, with the therapist, whoever you're working with. The number one indicator of making progress is first a safe relationship.
okay.
So if you're removed from that environment, and I mean, sure, this place could have trusted individuals who
Yeah.
work there and
Mhm,
have a good relationship, but
mhm.
that's the biggest thing. So removing anybody from their home and their lives would not, it would be a trauma, I feel,
Mhm, mhm,
for a
mhm.
lot of those kids. So,
And is reintegration important, and can that also be challenging? Because I guess
mhm,
the assumption, and this was not, again, trying to be, I don't want to put words into his mouth, and you guys can, Google and look all this stuff up as verifiable. But, he did not talk about, removing them from those camps at some point. So I don't know what the plans would be related to
mhm.
that. But should they eventually go home, I imagine, right,
Yeah.
to their families, is there difficulty with that reintegration? Like, what does that look like? Or would it be assumed that they are healed and ready to be part of the greater world?
I mean, yeah, there's, I think for anybody, there is a transition period when you're in an environment, moving into a new one,
Mm.
it's tough,
Yeah.
whatever that
Yeah.
looks like. So, a lot of the work that we do with therapies and supporting families is working on skills within the setting that they're going to use them
Mhm.
so we can limit that transition period.
Yeah.
So, there would definitely be probably
Bumps
just,
that go along with that
yeah.
too. Now, I've always felt that whether you are non-neurotypical or whether you are someone who presents in the world differently, I've had a variety of mental health conditions that I've had to confront both
Mhm.
in my marriage, in my home, in my, parenting, and in myself. I've struggled with anxiety. I've had to, get mental health support around that. You know, it's really important to me that we see people as the entire individual. And like you said, your diagnosis is not your destiny. It's not your whole being. It's not your whole
No.
identity. It's just like a thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if anything, people who are non-neurotypical, at least in my experience in life, have really been incredible contributors to our society because it really is just a different way of looking at the world that can be just outright magnificent. You know what I mean? Like there is
Absolutely.
something there and so do you have any stories of clients that you've worked with where you've said, "Holy cow, I'm just like amazed at how you look at things."
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have a lot of funny stories. I have a lot
Sure.
of inspiring stories, but I think just the biggest one, it's not a specific story,
Mhm.
but I think just overarching theme is the way that language is viewed sometimes.
Mhm.
So language can be taken very literally. So I've worked with a kiddo who he was playing on the playground with other kids around him. One of his goals was to interact a little bit more. We're helping
Mhm.
him to just socialize
Yeah.
because he desired to, but didn't always know how to initiate or how to interact. So there was one day that he independently walked over to a little girl who was on a swing and started pushing her. They're young, so
Oh,
I mean this is
yeah,
appropriate, and I
yeah.
was so excited.
Oh
I'm
my
in the background
gosh.
cheering, and then I like look a little closer and I realized he was trying to push her off the swing because he wanted to turn.
Oh,
So I'm
no.
like,
Oh,
almost.
baby. Almost. Close, close.
So there, it's just the conversation and like the things that
Yes.
are, it can be funny
It
sometimes,
oh,
but you learn to look at different people. You learn to look at individuals with just a different lens
mhm.
when you're working with people who are just see things differently, like you said.
So in your professional opinion, and I think I hear this a lot from educators overall, one of the biggest frustrations that I hear is, "Please stop making rules for us without talking to us."
Mm-hmm.
It's I just got the deepest and I know there's some teachers right now, and parents feel this way too. "Please stop doing stuff without talking to us," right? Would you say that's something you echo too in the field of, psychology and working with children?
For sure. I think there's a lot of good intention that comes from doing research and making changes and trying to make things and support and resources better.
Mhm.
But sometimes it lacks information from the people who will be affected.
Right.
So I always encourage anybody who's making changes or working with this community to talk to them,
Mhm.
talk to people who work with them, just get more understanding before making assumptions or making changes or making decisions about things that affect them.
No, that's really helpful, especially because it isn't a one-off.
Mhm.
So one of the things that's interesting is, we're having this chat in the summertime, but there was a recent announcement that as of September, we will have an answer to everything related to autism, and that was made by RFK Jr. as part of one of the goals of the administration which is, I mean, it's surprising to me, and I'm interested to see what they say they find, particularly because, gosh, I've been wanting cancer cured forever. And I
Mhm.
wish they could tell me that by July 15th of 2026, we will have an answer. I have never known medicine to work that way. So,
Mhm.
again, one of the goals of this administration is to approach things differently. So this
Mhm.
is a very different clinical approach to announce when you will have clinical information versus having the clinical information. But, they're saying that they're going to have a full answer for everything related to autism by September. Now, again, as RFK Jr. has stated, he is not a doctor and he has not engaged with children with autism. This is not his expertise. But I'd love to hear from you. Has that been how it's worked for you that, professionally you've been able to like meet a child and know when they'll be cured, and be able to tell their parents, like, is that how it goes? You can say, look, in about 6 weeks, your child will be able to be verbal if they are nonverbal.
Not at all. So the
Okay.
goal is typically to meet with the parents, to do an evaluation and to figure out what skills are the goal of the parent, first of
Mhm,
all, and
mhm.
eventually what goals the child has for themselves. So we work towards those goals. We take data, we do observations, we make progress towards them. When we hit a goal, we move it.
Right.
So it's always a little bit of trial and error. We look at
Mhm.
things that are working, we look at things that are not working, but we're not working towards a cure.
Or
We're
time.
not at all. There's no
Yeah.
time frame. It's more skill based. We're looking at what things can we do to make things easier for you, your life a little bit easier.
So no two diagnoses are the same in how they present.
Not at all.
Oh, well, that I guess makes it even more complicated when we hear
Hmm.
that there might be an all over answer by
Yeah.
September
I'm
because
eager to hear this answer
Yeah,
if
me
there
too.
is
I'm
one.
eager too. I mean, I'm eager too because I think one thing that we all collectively can say is we want kids to thrive. I
For
I
sure.
completely believe that that is the goal of every human,
Mhm.
is that we want children to thrive. But we also know that the way that works, because no two kids are the same, their path towards, a thriving life may look different. So
Mhm.
I'm interested
Definitely.
to hear the answer. And it'll be interesting to hear if they come up with 100 different paths because,
Right?
every child needs something different. So
Exactly.
I guess maybe we'll have you back to talk about that when that
Yeah.
comes out
See you
to
in September.
yeah, see you in September to get your professional take. We could put it on the calendar because you know when it's coming. So that said, that's all really helpful. And, I know that we talked a little bit about how there was a change and how, people are responding a little differently and all of that. Has that made your job any harder or easier? Have you found any additional either friction or ease, with
Mhm.
a lot of the changes in conversation around autism?
It's definitely changed my job. It makes it easier in some ways because people, like I said, just have more knowledge. They're
Mhm,
more open to understanding, and even within schools or different settings,
mhm,
more accommodations are being made.
mm.
Like a lot of even amusement parks or different places like that will have
Sensory days.
exactly
There
sensory
was a
days.
sensory box at JFK, and I thought it was the coolest
Oh, that's
thing.
amazing.
Yeah, it's just literally like a box, and I think in the room there I don't think there was anything in there, but it was just like, if there's airports doing a lot, here's an
Hmm.
immediate place you can kinda scurry your
It's
little off
quiet
to.
or
Yeah, or
wherever.
yourself as an adult, like,
Yeah.
to just get a little, like, kinda come down sort of
Hmm.
vibes.
Yeah.
I thought it was
So
brilliant.
I'm that's amazing.
Yeah.
So things like that have become easier. Making suggestions to people or even like businesses or schools or whatever it is isn't met with as much friction because
Mhm.
most of the time they're more opening and welcome to be a little bit more
Like,
accommodating.
it's destigmatized, like, there's
Yes.
more of an understanding and warmth around differently abled people,
Hmm.
which I'm all for, right? I
Yeah.
also think there's a lot more flexibility around, as a mom, because I
Hmm.
never thought I'd be having a newborn at this time, but boy, am I glad because I
Yeah.
think that there's just way more accommodations, even though it's still not enough, right? Like, that's what we're always saying is, like, more, more, right? But just way more accommodations, like, people are way kinder if there's a Zoom call and I'm like, "I am so sorry," or if I go someplace and there's a breast milk stain, they're like, "Girl," you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, people just understand more, so
Exactly.
that's really good to hear.
Hmm.
Now I can imagine, on the same vein though, there are probably elements that are tougher. Do
Hmm.
you do you worry about any of the changes from this administration, or do you worry about any of the conversations on social media or what's happening with influencer? Like, if I came to you and said I'd like to feed my kid bean broth as a method of treatment for their autism, like, how do you address that?
Hmm. I mean, I always enter conversations with empathy and I
Mhm.
enter them with listening and intent to
An
understand.
open
So
mind. Yeah.
I'm never going to judge anybody unless it's something that's harmful, then I will speak up. Like,
Sure.
that's not
You
something
have
you
to
should be
legally.
doing.
Legally, you
Yes,
have to.
exactly.
It's not even an option.
But if it's something like that, I will just usually tell families, parents, whoever I'm working with, I haven't seen any research that backs
Unfortunate.
that up. If
Mm,
you want to do that in addition to these things that would be helpful, that's totally fine.
mhm.
So there are things that can just be a little bit more frustrating. But like I said, I see the heart and where it's coming from. So I
Yes.
try to match it with other things that will be effective.
Yes, 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 and I think that that's one of the beautiful things that I love about this conversation and so many conversations I've been having, is that we're learning it's an "and" world. It's a
Mm-hmm.
both world. It's a not an us versus them. It's not a, "Hey, you guys got it wrong and we got it right and you are against us." It's more of a, "Hey, there's nothing wrong with building a sensory environment, that is low toxin and low chemicals and all natural if
Mm-hmm.
you have the financial privilege to even be
Absolutely.
able to do so."
Yeah.
But also know that there's a standard course of treatment and there's standard medical options, and
Mm-hmm.
a scientist can be your friend, and they're on your team
Yes.
as you described. And,
Mm-hmm.
listen to your favorite influencer on what blanket to buy, but also talk to your, doctor and, educational therapist to make sure that you're covering all the marks.
Absolutely.
Oh, I
Yes.
love that. So, okay. So if there was one ask that you have,
One.
right? Like, I know you're like, "Girl, I got a list," right? If there was one ask that you have that you wish that every person listening right now would adopt, right? As a behavior, as a mindset, as an advocacy out into the world to, speak for the kiddos, that
Mm-hmm.
either may be nonverbal and can't speak for themselves, or may not recognize how they're being seen in this world and how, would create a safer space for them. What would that one ask be?
I know my one ask would be to find and look for the strengths in people instead of pointing out their weaknesses first. When people are put into a box immediately, they'll stay within that box. So look for strengths, encourage strengths, and lead with love, honestly. I know that sounds simple or cliche, but that's not really how the world works right now. And if it did, we'd see a lot more change and a lot more kids thriving. So just look for strength and lead with love.
Oh, it's so, so good. It's so true. It's so honest. And you'd be surprised. That's a lot of what everyone says here. Like, be kind, lead with love,
Yeah.
help, be compassionate. And I think it's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for telling us more about everything that has to do with autism and helping us build a better world. I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. It was so fun.